Well, thank you very much, Nikolai, and don't worry, everybody, I'm not going to tell those stories. Skip does a good job of it and embarrasses me every time he does. Let me just say thank you all for being here this afternoon. It's great to see a real cross-section of people that we deal with on an everyday basis in a variety of different levels and contexts as a city that I think is a growing, dynamic, breathing, alive organism, really. And what we've done today in helping our colleagues here from the federal government is to tell them what we've been doing and to share advice and stories about how we can even do a better job. There's a pamphlet out in the back here, and it's called Smart Growth for Sustainable Communities, and it really is a matter of how we develop a place that we love to live in, to work in, to play in, and to understand those wonderful quality of life issues. And that type of a partnership in terms of creating sustainable communities is done at various levels. And while sometimes we like to say that the federal government really is not reaching down to local government, I will tell you that we have agencies that are with us today that are doing just the opposite, despite the government shutdown, which these guys didn't really have any control over. Now they used to work, and some of these people used to work for some of those legislators up there that did have some control over the thing. But it's really exciting to see the breakdown, what I call the breaking down of the silos, these federal agencies that heretofore would work pretty much isolated in their own area, and it's been really refreshing to see the integration of these organizations. And we are very, very pleased to have representatives from the Department of Transportation here, from the Housing Urban Development, from the EPA. As we talked about today, we also have the Department of Agriculture with us, and while we didn't spend a lot of time on that because I know you were working with some folks in East Arkansas, certainly in our city, part of this quality of life issue dealing with food deserts and community gardens and all of those kinds of issues that do go through USDA are very, very important to the livability of our communities. So we've got the Department of Agriculture here. We've talked about how important the National Endowment of the Arts are in terms of not only creative placemaking, but places for those wonderful creative people to live in. And certainly the Bureau of Interior in terms of the historic fabric of our neighborhoods and our architecture, particularly what's happening on Main Street. And so everything from the bicycle lanes that we're putting on Main Street to the renovation and the creative corridor of arts and culture, and now with our wonderful technology authority having made a very wise decision to put the technology corridor downtown, to add science and technology to that. We've had an opportunity to preview for these ladies and gentlemen some of the things that are going on at the local level. And so it is my pleasure to introduce these folks and then let them have an opportunity to visit with you. And we're going to leave some time for questions and answers. So please, as they go through their dialogue, if you will, think about the questions you'd like to ask. I'm pleased to introduce Beth Osborne. Beth is an acting secretary for transportation with DOT. And she has, prior to that, was the deputy assistant secretary for transportation policy and has worked in a variety of ways dealing with the surface transportation reauthorization, MAP 21, that my Metroplan folks know all about in the back, to managing the Tiger discretionary grants, and I've had a conversation with her about that as well, since we're going to try and figure out if they ever give any more of those out that we maybe have a chance at it. And very interestingly enough, also working on the programs through the Department of Transportation on livability initiatives. Before that, she worked on Safety Lou for Senator Tom Carper, and on the Energy Independence and Security Act. She's been a legislative director for Smart Growth America, so she's got a long history of dealing with these issues in terms of environmental policy work at the the Southern Governors Association. She's from New Orleans, and you wouldn't be surprised here in Arkansas to know that she has a Bachelor of Arts degree and a Juris Doctor degree from our wonderful friends at LSU. We got a game coming up, and Brett Bealham is really trying to change the dynamic of what's been going on. So be ready. Next to Beth is Maurice Jones, who is the Deputy Secretary for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Maurice was confirmed by the United States Senate in March of 2012. He is the second most senior official at HUD, and he manages the department's day-to-day operations, the annual operating budget, and the agency's almost 9,000 employees. Prior to joining HUD, Maurice was the president of several media organizations, Pilot Media, the largest digital and print organization in Hampton Roads, Virginia. He worked for a variety of other kinds of publishing groups, and he also, as a Virginia native, worked as the commissioner of the Virginia Department of Social Services and worked for then Governor Mark Warner of Virginia. He's been at Treasury, and he also was the assistant to the general counsel and served as legal counsel for the community development finance institutions. During the Clinton administration, we've had a chance to visit on the phone several times, and he knows his way around Congress. He knows how to try and make sure that we get the decisions made that are proper, that help local government, and I'm very pleased to have him here. He actually worked with a firm that invests millions and millions of dollars in low-income urban buildings with a private sector development company, and that's really something that is very, very important from a HUD perspective. He too is a victim of being a lawyer. He has a law degree from the University of Virginia and a BA degree from Hampton-Sydney, Virginia, and somewhere in between there he maybe met Bill Clinton over at Oxford in England in between there. Next to Maurice, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Bob Persepi, who is the Deputy Administrator for the U.S. Department of Environmental Protection, the Environmental Protection Agency. He has worked in the Obama administration since 2009, and he returned there, having been there before as the agency's Chief Operating Officer. And in the role that he has now, he continues with a career of nearly 4 decades of stewardship on environmental policy, advocacy, and the national resources that we have and how those can best be managed. He is a true scholar in the area of the environmental protection of our country, and we're very, very honored to have him here. He also worked in President Clinton's administration as one of the top officials with the EPA, working on water issues, air quality issues, and interestingly enough, I think really a great segue into the EPA. He served prior to that as the Chief Operating Officer for the National Audubon Society. And so I'll tell you, we're very pleased to have him here. He worked with the city of Baltimore. He likes mayors, he told me. He was the head of their environmental operations for the state of Maryland, and went to Cornell University and got a master's degree in planning and public administration, and then to the Maxwell School at Syracuse University. And I don't think he is a lawyer. Lucky man that he is. Yes, yes. And then finally we have Krista Harden with us, who is the Deputy Secretary for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. She served previously as the Chief of Staff for then Secretary Tom Vilsack. And during that tenure, she worked with at the National Association of Conservation Districts as the Chief Executive Officer. She's worked in private consulting capacities as a Senior Vice President, and in that area dealt with a variety of commodity organizations, notably the American Soybean Association, and also working in areas of conservation, environment, and energy issues. So I am pleased that we have all of these top-ranking people from these 4 different agencies of government. And now we're going to hear from them, and let me start with Beth, and then Maurice, and then Bob, and then to Krista. Okay?
Can folks hear me? There we go. So 4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago, we put together this partnership starting with HUD and DOT. Secretary Donovan approached then Secretary LaHood and said, mayors want to build places that attract businesses and people, and they need both of our programs to do it. And soon thereafter, we approached EPA. I had been lucky enough to work with their Office of Sustainable Communities for years and knew that there was a lot of experience in there and that we could not have this partnership without them and their brownfields office and their water office and so much of their work, which is so important to building these sustainable communities. And then along the way, we started talking about what this meant for rural America and knew we couldn't go further without USDA. And so that's how we formed. What we're trying to accomplish is building communities that have transportation choice, housing choice, and destinations close to home. So it's not just good enough to build a sidewalk that goes to nowhere. It actually has to take you to that bite of pizza or the bank or school or whatever it is you need. And the reason we care about it is because those communities are cheaper to people. It saves a lot of money on transportation when you don't have to get in the car and drive long distances for every single thing you have to do. And in fact, we've just released a tool called the Location Affordability Portal. It's available online. It was a partnership between HUD and DOT to let you look at housing costs and transportation costs and learn what are the trade-offs. Sometimes you might look for a cheaper house but find that where you've located is now so far from your job, all the savings on the house is lost to increased transportation costs. And so this tool can help you determine where your best bargain is. But we want to support those communities that give people a chance to live. A family of four maybe could live with 2 or 3 cars instead of having to have 1 car for every single person in their household. We also care about it because it's cheaper for government. That places that put their new development where there's already infrastructure save a lot of money in avoided infrastructure costs. And we care about it because it's what the market wants, it's what people want. Every time a mayor comes to visit us, he talks or she talks about building communities like this to attract talent. And every time we hear from folks from corporate America, they say things are changing these days. We have to follow talent. People decide where they want to live and then they look for a job. As opposed to 20 years ago where everyone went to where the jobs are. So building communities like this that attract talent, attract people to where the sort of area they want to settle into is very important. And this is what the market's looking for, an area where they can get around easily in many different ways, in or out of their car. And I see so many beautiful things happening in communities like this. So we're here to see what you've accomplished here, which is, in the 10 years since I've been here, is an extraordinary amount, and learn from you all so that we can answer some of those questions when other mayors come in and ask how does this get done, and figure out how we can organize our programs in a way that supports the outcomes you all are seeking instead of some of the things we found in the past, going back to HUD and DOT. When we first started, theoretically you could use HUD funding to match DOT funding, except for HUD funding you had to hire locally and DOT didn't allow you to hire locally. Little rules like that that interrupt the ability of mayors to do what they really, really want to. We've come in, we've addressed those problems, and we are continuing to look for those barriers that we can overcome. So thank you for having us. We look forward to hearing from you.
Good afternoon. I would just add to what Beth has said. From the HUD perspective, I think we've had this epiphany or revelation for some time, but we're beginning now to act on it, which is housing without access to health, access to jobs, access to shopping, housing without transportation and land planning is not the quality of housing we're trying to provide. And so from our perspective, we need these partners in order to truly provide people with high quality, affordable choices for housing. You can't divorce housing from transportation, and jobs, and land planning, and health. You just can't do it. So this partnership for us makes sense from a selfish point of view, in that we want our investment of dollars and talent and resources and technical assistance to truly be investments that have a chance of being sustainable. and we want them to be, if you will, we want them to reflect what we know are the realities and the demands and needs of the people we're trying to serve, right? We really want them to help the folks. So this partnership makes sense from the standpoint of our mission. It makes sense from the standpoint of the fact that we've got to get the biggest return on every dollar in particular that we invest. And fortunately, everybody here is nice to work with, right? But at the end of the day, we're just chumps from Washington trying to work with folks across the country who are really doing the work. And so it's mayors, right? It's people in philanthropy, it's people in higher education, it's businesses, it's all these folks who are living and working, making a living and working in a community who are trying to make sure that those communities can be passed on to their children and grandchildren with more assets than they received them. And so what we're looking for is to find partners like that to try to bring the assets we have to the table to help folks realize their aspirations. And so there's a lot of work that we have going on throughout Arkansas. I know we here at HUD have a grant that Metro Plan is using, and we've got a grant for the local housing authority, and we've got a grant at work for planning in East Arkansas, and all of us are heavily invested in Arkansas. And we came here to hear how that work is going in this particular part, but we also came here to listen to see how we can be better partners. One last thing, and then I'll be quiet for now. We know that when we go out, we hear at least two things loudly and clearly. One is, bring us more money, right? We would expect to hear that. But we hear just as often, can you make it easier to work with you, right? Can you harmonize your requirements? Can you reduce the burdens or the hoops we have to jump through to work with you? And so a big aspiration in this partnership is to attempt to do that latter as well as that former. Reduce the hoops, reduce the process that you have to jump through, that places across the country have to jump through in order to work with us. And so it's a work in progress. We are all striving to get better at that, but your achievements and your leadership inspire us to try to be better. So I want to thank you. Thank you for having us here today. So thank you.
Well, hi, I'm Bob Perciasepi, and I'm the Deputy Administrator at EPA, and one of the key things we're doing here today in Little Rock and in other parts of Arkansas is just trying to make sure we stay connected and learn from how things are going on the ground. So we can bring that chump change back to Washington and do even a better job of what we're trying to do. I have to say, being in the Clinton School of Public Service is pretty exciting for me, but having worked for him, but also, I also work in the other building that's named after Bill Clinton, the William Jefferson Clinton building in Washington, D.C. is now EPA's home. So, and it's related to his, I think, work on the environment, which you can read about next door here. You know, EPA's role here, and I appreciate, Beth, the way you sort of brought that in a little bit, and people don't normally think of EPA's role in the way we're talking about it here, that we're involved with improving livability of a city, that people think of us chasing polluters, looking for regulations and things of that nature. But the truth is that a substantial amount of what EPA does is aimed specifically at improving quality of life. That is what we do in many respects. That's what the laws that Congress passed that we implement were set up to do. And, you know, Maurice is mentioning housing getting good housing doesn't really get you there if it's not near a store or you don't have a way to get to, or choices on how to get places. Or it also isn't very good if the air is polluted there, or if you can't drink the water, or there's no place to recreate, or the land around it is contaminated. So we found more and more at EPA, which is why I think this partnership is so important, that those programs we implement directly relate to that quality of life and the ability of local communities to mount their own economic development programs. So when we were downtown with the mayor earlier today, as we were going down Main Street, we could see where housing improvements are taking place. We could see how the transportation system on Main Street itself, particularly on South Main Street, is really being improved. But we could also see vacant lots that were cleaned up and are now ready for redevelopment. We could also see people adopting low-impact development approaches to managing stormwater. I was virtually standing on an old stormwater manhole when we were down talking to some of the press earlier today, which is the old way of dealing with stormwater underneath that metal manhole. The new way is growing plants along Main Street so that it is actually filtering the pollution and recharging the groundwater and creating microclimates that are more hospitable to humans. Who thought that you would want to do that in a downtown area? So we've worked directly with the mayor and mayors around the country in a program we call Greening America's Capitals, where we use the convening power of EPA and the other federal agencies to try to bring people together and look at a vision of how these things were working together. So a lot of that is happening in Little Rock, so it's really an important place for us to come so that we can take back what we learn and do things better. The last thing I'll mention is those of you who are interested in this, the three agencies have produced a sort of summary of how things are going. It's called Partnership for Sustainable Communities, 3 years of helping communities achieve their visions for growth and prosperity. And that's the key. The key there is achieving their vision. And I don't have enough copies of this, but you can get it at epa.gov/smart growth. And probably on the same thing for the other agencies as well. So I'll stop there and turn it over to Krista.
Hi, everyone. I am a little late to the party in that the three agencies have been doing this for some time, and many of you may wonder, what does the Department of Agriculture have to do with the three other agencies represented here and this work in urban areas? And I'll answer it in a couple ways. First of all, USDA does do a lot of work with farmers and ranchers, which is our foundation, obviously, but we do a lot of other things, including our rural development work, which is broad-reaching, far-reaching into the fabric of the entire country, frankly. And we fund things like libraries and hotels sometimes, and fire departments and clinics, health clinics, and a variety of other of facilities that actually add to the value of life, quality of life in rural communities. We do broadband. We have housing programs. We are multi-purposed at USDA, so our reach is far and wide. But we also have a component in urban areas that some may not think about, which go along with this agenda, frankly. And we have an urban forestry program. We have programs that fund farmers markets, and that empty city block that Bob just mentioned would be a great place for an urban garden, and maybe a farmers market to come for that, to make sure that everyone has access to healthy food, and maybe even grown by neighbors. So I think that USDA does have a role in this, and the urban-rural interface is so critical. Many people want to live in a rural community. They want to raise their kids there, but they may have to have a job somewhere else, so they're going to need roads that go somewhere that matter, and make sure that we're all connected. So we're happy to be a part of this, maybe as an informal partner at this point, but I'm pleased to be here today. Thank you.
Well, thank you all very much for those overviews. We're going to open this up for questions, and I think I'll start off with the first question if I could. You know, some of these people in the audience here may not be totally aware of the tremendous public-private partnership that is going on Main Street that we did take a tour of this morning. You know, in addition to there are going to be 256 apartments, by the way, on Main Street by the summertime of next year, which, when you talk about the issue of proximity and livability, it is a real exciting thing to see that kind of activity that'll be there, not just during the workday, but will be there 24/7 with the activities and amenities that are coming. Certainly the Creative Corridor, we were a beneficiary of several grants from the federal government, which helped to get this whole thing started. First a vision, I guess, on how to take the most important street in the state of Arkansas, Main Street, and get it back to where it used to be in terms of its vibrancy. And so that started way back in 2007, and here we are in 2013. And I want to say thank you very much because we did receive some grants that helped us with the planning process. And that's kind of a preface to my question, because I did not know. I'm one of these people that really got educated about the EPA, because I thought it was basically regulatory, and you got friends that, you know, hate the EPA. They think all they're doing is hammering them out all the time with penalties and regulations that are not fair and not balanced. And I'm sure that Bob's heard that for his whole career. But I've come to appreciate, nevertheless, the importance of that regulation in a broad context. But I didn't know until I'm called the grant king. You know, when I was a prosecutor, we didn't have any money at the county, and so I would look for grants. And so I get over to the city as a mayor, and I'm looking for grants. And so I get these things and read them, and there was one called the Greening of America's Capitals. And I thought, well, we're a capital city. Maybe we should go after that. And I really didn't appreciate that what that greening aspect meant was the sustainable community issues that Bob just mentioned in terms of that. And we were very fortunate to have a wonderful group of folks come in as planners and spend a lot of time coming up with a concept and a plan that really began to make an awareness of the issues of sustainability, the issues of how we deal with stormwater runoff, how we use that incidentally to beautify the landscape, and how that creates better air, better water, and all of the things that go on. So the Sustainable Communities Division of the EPA was something that I really, really opened my eyes up to, and it's one of the coolest things that I've ever had a chance to be a part of, very honestly. And of course that led then into what I call action grants. That's where we get the money to actually do something other than plan. I know plans stay on shelves too often, and so when we get other kind of money, it's really, really exciting. And so I want you to know that we're the beneficiaries of nearly $1 million worth of EPA Section 319 money that's going to help us actually build the low-impact development aspects that were put in place by our NEA grant that dealt with the Creative Corridor, which dealt with not only the assemblage of our arts organizations, but the idea of using the low-impact development tools and expertise that the EPA, through their Sustainable Communities Division, is exercising. So that's a long preface, and I apologize for that. But I want to know how did the EPA ever really become involved in sustainable communities? Well, how did that? You've been there for a long time, so maybe you're the one that did it, Bob. I'm just curious, and I know we were one of the first 10 to get one of these grants, and now you've probably made it to most of the capitals in the country. I'm curious, number one, not only how did you really get involved in it, but what kind of lessons have you learned by these experiences in all these different cities, all these capital cities around the country?
Very quickly, it's a pretty natural thing for us to get into. When you look at air pollution, we're looking at, for instance, reducing the miles people drive in their cars every day. That means having jobs, whether they're in rural areas or in urban areas, closer to where people live. We recognize that dealing with stormwater pollution in the more traditional ways was probably going to be A, too expensive, and B, dig up all the cities. And so we're really struggling to find different ways to do it, and we really have hit upon, with many, many other people in the country, a concept that really does exactly what you just said, creates amenities while you're doing pollution control. So these things came together for us for a long time, and there's been a lot of research done that shows that a community system, whether it's a rural community or a larger urban area, where people are closer to where they work, where the services they need are closer to their homes, where they have choices in transportation to get to that, all of that reduces pollution. And that really is what Congress set up EPA, Congressman Richard Nixon set EPA up to do, was to reduce pollution and improve public health. And so at some point, you can't keep regulating things. You can't regulate how far people drive. It's never going to happen, and I would never want to be associated with anything that did it. But what we can do is use our convening power and our partnerships to pull these things together. So it was a natural thing, as Beth said, when HUD and DOT started to think about this. It was sort of a natural thing that we would get involved. But again, people don't think much about it. Our desire to not see, when I worked as a city planner in the 70s and the 80s, when I would look at an old industrial parcel, I didn't know what to do with it. It was like I was staring at a wall. I had no idea. And then in the 90s and then over the last decade, EPA has sort of perfected with its state partners the concept of brownfields instead of greenfields. Instead of building a factory on prime agricultural land, you could reuse these properties and find a different way to get to the cleanup result you needed to do. And your city has taken advantage of that. North Little Rock has taken advantage of that. The William Jefferson Clinton Library took advantage of that. So that is a good thing to do, and it helps revitalize communities. But our key thing here is that if you do this right, you can also reduce pollution, and whether it's greenhouse gases or the more traditional ones. So that's how we got involved. And I'm not going to go, I want to let other people talk a little bit more about lessons learned, but I just want to say one thing, and I'm not sucking up here, Mayor, but it doesn't happen if there isn't local leadership. And you have to know that.
Thank you. Okay, we can open this up to all of you now for some questions. I know there's, let me first call on our own city sustainability officer, Melinda Glasgow, for the first question. Melinda, and then we'll take others as well. I think there's a microphone coming, so.
Thank you all for being here. Is it on? Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you all so much for being here. This is such an exciting project, and specifically Bob and your group with the Greening of America's Capitals kicking us all off for this. And Maurice, I'm not going to disappoint. I guess my question would be, this is so exciting and so much fun that what's the likelihood maybe of continuing to work with us on some other projects?
Are you talking about money?
Yes, I'm talking about money, yeah.
I didn't think anybody was going to ask me that question. So I hope that the likelihood is high. I will tell you and tell everybody in this room that one of our fights is to continue to get our partners in Congress to continue to provide dollars so we can do the kind of work that our sustainable communities and housing area within the department is engaged in. So my hope is that we will be able to continue to provide new dollars via this group within HUD for quite some time to come. I will tell you that it's important for all of us to make sure that folks know about the important work going on here and the importance of having sustainable funding for sustainable communities, right? So we're with you. There are other things that we're doing. We've provided NSP funds, for example, neighborhood stabilization funds for both Little Rock and North Little Rock in particular, almost $17 million that the two cities have been using to essentially work with foreclosed homes and to, frankly, demolish and rebuild homes. I saw some of that going on today. So I'm hopeful, but I'm not naive. We, every day, have to make the case to the media, to our congressional partners, that this work is having an impact in cities like Little Rock and North Little Rock and East Arkansas, and that this has nothing to do with politics. This has everything to do with helping mayors and others solve local problems. And we need Congress, we need HUD, we need transportation, we need EPA to be good partners. And they need to hear that message from us clearly, but you all are a more influential voice in that story than we are. They expect me to come up and say, hey, how about some more money? But what we really need are your voices saying, you know what, this stuff works, and we need the government to be a good partner. So that's a long-winded answer to, I hope I'm with you for a long time.
Do any of the rest of you want to chime in about the money? You know, I will tell you that I learned today from Tony Ramick, who heads up the State Department on the Section 319 grant, that our project on Main Street has taken up 1/3 of their budget, which I did not know. It suggests to me that obviously, you know, for us to be able to continue, for cities to be able to continue these things, we're going to have to put our voices there with you to try and make sure that those funding levels are maintained or perhaps even increased in the right way. Okay, some other questions. I think I saw somebody down here. Yes, go ahead, please. Here comes a microphone.
Okay. Thank you. I just have a question to the panel. Do the panel have any relationship with the U.S. Department of Education? I'm currently working on a project in Wheeler County, Georgia, as far as building a charter school, and I want to know, it's in the rural area, and the land is undeveloped and it may have contaminants on it and things of that nature, and I was just trying to see what type of relationship that you have with the U.S. Department of Education.
I'm happy to answer that. Yes, we do, and we will be happy to talk to you. Maybe we can follow up with the specifics, but we do work with Department of Ed on joint efforts on education and facilities in rural areas. That'd be great. Love to learn more.
I'd also add that our partnership goes well beyond these 4 agencies. We work on individual projects with a lot of different agencies, including the Department of Energy, Health and Human Services, Education, the CDC. There's a lot of partnership going on across government. These are the 4 agencies that work together the most and on the widest array of issues. With the Department of Transportation, we often hear about schools that are sited and only after they're built do we think about the transportation needs. We need to change that. We need to think about the transportation needs as part of the cost of the building because again, just like with your home, the location might seem great when you just look at the cost of the infrastructure of the building itself, but when you look at the transportation costs, you realize it's actually not cheaper. In fact, it's more expensive. And so bringing those transportation costs in at the beginning is how you make sure that you keep people with good access to opportunity, ladders of opportunity, as my boss likes to call it, and something that is sustainable and affordable.
Let's go over here for a second.
Quick about the schools. On the EPA website, we do have guidelines for school siting. On the EPA, I don't know what the full thing is, but if you go to EPA, well, actually, probably just go to Google and type in EPA school siting guidelines. You got them there too?
EPA.gov/smart growth.
Sorry. There's been a lot of studies lately about healthy home environments and the connection to all sorts of things from medical costs, productivity, livability of communities, and so forth. And each of your agencies, I'm not sure about transportation, but I know the other agencies have your own Healthy Homes initiatives going on. Can you all just speak briefly to that and maybe future funding and future ideas concerning Healthy Homes initiatives?
Sure. So we have a Healthy Homes area as well, and that that piece of our department largely is a grant-making function, and it's a grant-making function that is focused on helping, in most cases, local nonprofits and governments go in and make homes healthier than they are at the time that it enters. And, you know, radon was a big focus for us, or is a big focus. Asthma, preventing, going in and trying to eliminate those things that could, if you will, create asthma risk for children. We're now focusing a lot of attention on working with housing authorities in an effort to encourage them to be smoke-free. So there, we go into homes, or we fund partners who go into homes and eliminate, if you will, places within the homes that seniors could trip and fall. I mean, it ranges from smoking to tripping and falling to mold, you name it, and we're providing grants. We have about $120 million pot each year with which to do this, and it's primarily grants and technical assistance grants. And I have the opportunity there is huge, and the savings that you cited, some of the studies, the savings from making homes healthier, healthcare savings in particular, are, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars a year. Yeah, so there is a huge opportunity there. It's again the kind of work that we need to get to a much bigger scale than we're at now.
Does anyone else want to comment on that? Bob?
I'll just add a little bit to what Maurice said. He mentioned asthma several times, and the agencies, all the agencies, not just these agencies, have gotten together and done a cross-agency asthma action plan. So each agency's role, and in particular, you know, EPA is involved with things like lead paint and removal of lead, you know, when houses are renovated or older houses are, because new paint doesn't have lead in it, but the old paint still does. And radon is another big program that we have. And in a sense, the stuff under your kitchen sink, or perhaps in the garage, the chemicals that are used in various indoor pesticides these days are a lot less toxic than they were 30 years ago. There used to be organophosphates and things of that nature. Now they're not benign. They're designed to kill things, but they're not as toxic as they used to be. And so a lot of the furniture and other things that, you know, have reduced amounts of various chemicals in them than they used to, because of stuff that EPA does more generally. But I think the biggest thing that the agencies have done together is that asthma action plan, and that actually gets at a lot of the issues together. If you sort of approach it in that entry point, it does create benefits across the board on the other issues.
I'm not sure if something exactly on topic has been done. I know that from the transportation side, we've worked with the CDC and groups like that have looked at not just the building itself, but its location and is it in an area where people can move around in their regular life, and how that impacts health as well. And they found that if you live in a community where you can walk to school, walk to the things you need, that you tend to have lower cases of high blood pressure. I believe the study that was done about 10 years ago showed an average of a 6-pound difference in people who live in car-dependent communities versus walkable communities. So there's very strong health impacts to that location and whether or not you're in an area where you can live an active lifestyle.
Let's try over here for a minute on this side. Okay, right in front.
Hello, my name is Jenna Rhodes, and I am a Class 8 Clinton School student and a first-year public health student at UAMS. I'm extremely interested in this topic, and it's what I'm going to spend the rest of my life working on. Combining the two areas of my education, I have a twofold question. My first is, could you speak to the metrics that you have chosen to use to measure success in your combined work? I know that each of you have metrics that you use individually in your departments, but have you decided to come together and agree on a set of metrics to use for Sustainable Communities projects? And then second, could you speak to your intentional strategies for community engagement? What I've been learning is a lot of times cities, no offense, Mayor, have ideas about what they see for their communities, but a lot of times residents of communities are left out of the conversation. So I'm curious what you've built into the process to make sure that residents are being heard. Thank you.
It's an excellent question. I will say in my program, we don't have a long history of measuring performance. We're making our first baby steps into that now under our new law known as MAP 21, and Congress has listed out several metrics that we are to use. Frankly, not a lot that overlap with this partnership. But we are looking at ways to infuse some of these concepts into those measures. We've also, through our Tiger program, we've established some metrics that we are piloting for those who've gotten awards to measure the outcomes they claim will come from the project, just to see what we can learn. One of the biggest problems we run into is there's not a lot of money for data collection out there. And so just following after a project for years and seeing what the outcomes are can be a challenge for folks. And so that's something we're working on and looking for ways to collect that data more economically. But we have looked at things across our agencies. That's, in fact, where the Housing plus Transportation Affordability Index came from, is the desire to look for ways to measure these cross-cutting issues. And we're always interested in looking for other similar tools.
Yeah, I would just add to that I think we're all trying to figure out what the best metrics are. I mean, we've got, in our case, for example, a significant amount of the funding in this space we do is for planning, regional planning, collective planning. So an easy metric for us is, okay, you got a plan, but we clearly have to, has to be deeper than that, and so we clearly will have to refine metrics over time. On the second piece, the community engagement piece of your question, it's an interesting hypothesis. Now, our hypothesis, I believe, and folks should correct me if I get that wrong, is still that the champion and leader of community engagement has to be at the local level, that we are not the folks who are in the best position to tell you how best to engage the community. Now, we insist on it. We absolutely insist on it. And I would tell you that, the evidence we have here is that you've got a model here of folks reaching out to the community. I know MetroPlan in particular has been doing some work with the Boys and Girls Club, for instance. I mean, it's that kind of comprehensive community engagement that we insist on. We would welcome any input on that, but for us, you can't get a sustainable plan if the voices are not at the table in the planning.
I'd like to just quickly say, if you, in your studies, or anybody in this room, is aware of a way that these sorts of outcomes, sustainable communities outcomes, are measured, we'd like to hear from you about how you're doing at the local level. We have learned so much just by getting input from communities on how they're measuring success, and it's a wide variety of input. You know, at the federal level, the biggest thing anyone's in Congress gets concerned about in terms of transportation is safety and congestion. When I talk to a lot of mayors, they say congestion is not one of our top concerns. Safety is a much bigger one, and frankly, a little congestion is a sign of success. So congestion is not our top priority, but it's in there, and that's useful to us to learn. So please don't ask me. Tell me what you're doing.
I think we have done a really great job in Little Rock and in North Little Rock of the community engagement piece. I just meant not all mayors do it, but a lot of mayors, I think, and city governments forget to ask the people who live there, well, what do they want? So.
Okay, I think in the back, Don Zimmerman, who's the executive director of the Arkansas Municipal League. And then we'll go back over to this side over here. I'll try and...
There's a discussion going on at our state capitol last week. I wasn't in attendance, but I heard about it, where, and I don't know whether it falls under the jurisdiction of any of your agencies, regarding an endangered species. The rabbit's foot mussel and the Neosho mucket, I think. And this area that's been defined is around 30% of the state or something like that of the area. And our organization hadn't taken a position on it, but we were concerned. We're being told that this may cause a big increase in stormwater permitting fees and so forth for municipalities if this area is not reduced. Our friends in county government are very concerned about this because they feel like that it's going to inhibit their ability to build more rural roads and dirt roads and that sort of thing with the runoff from that. But I was just wondering if any of you all might have any comments as what is a good policy that Arkansas ought to be trying to follow on that issue.
Well, first of all, just as a disclaimer here, speaking for another agency, the National Marine Fisheries Service in NOAA and the Fish and Wildlife Service in the Department of Interior are the two agencies that are responsible for the Endangered Species Act. But all of us have to comply with it. So, so we're not unfamiliar with it. And I'm not familiar with the exact issue you're bringing up, or even why it would relate to a stormwater issue. But I can imagine water pollution must be species that are sensitive to water pollution, I'm guessing, based on what you said. So I don't really have the specific information, but I would encourage you to think more broadly about the issue, because there are ways to do broader habitat conservation plans that provide for a way to deal with development that needs to take place, and at the same time creating the habitat that's necessary. But I shouldn't answer about this one because I don't know, and the other agencies here may have some other insights.
I don't know this particular issue, but I will say that the challenges you're facing are not unique. That we face endangered species issues across the country. The president has put together what we call a rapid response team, which is made up of the infrastructure agencies as well as all of the resource agencies that manage things like endangered species or Clean Water Act permits or anything that's a part of the environmental review process in building infrastructure. And we've had great success in working together to work through these issues. The key is how early do you bring those resource agencies in the room? Unfortunately, our tradition is you start engineering your project, you get to good 20-25% engineering, you're really fixated on a result, and then you invite them in the room and tell them to hurry up and approve it as is. That is a failed method. It always ends up in trouble. It always slows down. When they're brought in very early and their involvement in the project is eligible for federal reimbursement in my program, it changes the entire dynamic. It ensures that the alternatives you're analyzing are the least impactful. it can reduce a lot of costs, it can really speed up a project. And I think the relationship that we formed with our resource agencies has enhanced that even further. So maybe we can talk offline a little bit, but we're here, you know, we've got our division administrator from FHWA who's here, who works closely with the state and the municipalities that are working through our program, and that partnership with those resource agencies just makes all the difference.
Okay, in the back here, and I think we have time for about 2 or 3 quick more questions.
To what extent is the federal government recognizing the value of the bicycle as a means of helping to solve the transportation problems in this country? And I underline transportation, not just recreation, but transportation through funding. And do you think that that is a worthwhile pursuit for federal funding?
Yes. We've in fact received some criticism because of the focus we put on the bicycle. Let me say this about bicycling and pedestrians. There's no cheaper way to move people around. The cost of a pair of sneakers is an incredibly inexpensive mode of transportation. Bicycle accommodations can be as cheap as a stripe of paint. And it turns out where you make it safe and comfortable, people will come out in droves. On my way into town last night, it was pretty chilly. I saw several bicyclists out downtown. I remember when we I guess it was 3 years ago, we took a trip to Minneapolis in December. It was freezing. I was outside of the bus that we were on the tour for about 2.5 minutes, and I was frozen, and there were people bicycling down their main bicycle path. They're made of some strong material up there. But especially in communities like this that are you know, geographically tightly woven, and it's flat, and the weather is good you know, most of the year, it is an obvious choice, and it's something we certainly want to support. It's also something that businesses are looking at, because that's the sort of environment young talent wants to find. I remember speaking to the mayor of Indianapolis, who said he had Fortune 500 companies coming to town and saying, you know, I like your town, but you just don't have enough bike lanes. And the talent we need to attract, they want bike lanes. And he has since built, I believe, over 100 miles of bike lanes. They have a downtown shower facility for bike commuters, and they've seen some real changes down there. So we see the economic benefits of this. We see the market demand for it. And the biggest thing is it is an incredibly inexpensive solution for communities, especially in cities that just don't have places to put more big roadways, nor do they have infinite dollars to build massive highways to get more people through a corridor.
Last question. The gentleman back there has had his hand up quite some time. Yes, please.
First of all, thank you all for being here. My name is Ramirez Biddle. I'm a Class 9 student at the Clinton School of Public Service. My question is regarding with one of the hometowns that I'm from, is Texarkana. 15 years ago, Texarkana operated as 2 separate towns, separated by the state line of Arkansas and Texas, if any of you are not familiar with it. But it has now since grown to a town of about 70,000 people and a metro area of about 140,000 people. And coming down the pike, joining Interstate 30 will be Interstate 49 and 69. So this is setting up the city to move from a large rural town to more an urbanized city. My question to you all is, what should Texarkana do to best urbanize the city while mitigating growing pains such as distances from services, increasing quality homes, and becoming more green? How can they focus on building inward instead of focusing on building outward?
Somebody want to tackle that?
I'll start. Okay, that's the end of my answer. All right, am I still there?
Yeah.
So I think that what we've been talking about is, so let me start this way. I want to be very humble in suggesting to any place how they should do their work, because I've never been there, right? But I think what we're finding, and whether it's urbanization or whether it's revitalization or planning for the future, that the ingredient that needs to be there is comprehensive planning, meaning that at one and the same time, the planners need to be thinking about affordable homes that can be connected to jobs that are paying living wages, that can connect people to health and healthy foods, that can also be surrounded by high-performing schools. You do that, you got it made, right? Simple as that. But it's this issue of, right, not compartmentalizing your journey of growth or your journey of urbanization, that you've got to have all of these things in mind to have a chance of getting it right, to have a chance of producing something that's sustainable and vibrant and attractive.
Well, thank you very much. For those of you who didn't get your questions addressed yet, I want you to know that this group are going to be reconvening over at the Clinton Library for some panel discussions with the public and with mayors. One of the things that that Maurice alluded to was the Jumpstart program through MetroPlan. We're very fortunate that there are 5 communities that are receiving $200,000 to do some planning, and hopefully that planning will turn into one of them action grants I've been talking about. And so we're going to have mayors and other people talking about these things and continuing this dialogue. So for those of you who can attend, I would encourage you to stretch your legs and go back over to the Clinton Library, where this will continue. Let me just say thank you so much for investing your time in our city. We're pretty proud of it, and we're pretty proud of Central Arkansas, and we hope that we've both been able to learn from each other on this, and it's exciting, and I want to personally invite you back next summer, and we'll see how far along we've come. Let's hear it for our panel.